Hello, welcome to this week's lecture on using standardized tests and self-assessment procedures in career counseling. And so, what is the rationale for tests and assessments in career counseling? Overall, the purpose or the rationale is to help us to identify a person's abilities uh, and their skill sets and how we could use that information to um, help them to get into the type of jobs that they require. And so today we'll look at standardized testing and assessments and see how um, those assist in career counseling. And so, standardized tests and assessments is not something that's relatively new. It's been used. Um, the history has been the its history its use as being dates back to a long time in the past. Starting in the mid 40s, aptitude tests were developed. In the previous videos, I did share about career counseling and how that is associated um, also with the events that had happened immediately after the First World War and the Second World War, when soldiers returned from the war and they had severe injuries and disabilities, and also some of them were um, not skilled to make a transition to the workforce. Um, they had to introduce measures that kind of assisted them to help test their skills and abilities in order for counselors to help them to achieve their career and educational goals. And so, since the 40s, multiple aptitude tests have been developed, and they're widely used in education and vocational testing. During the last 3 decades, the emphasis is placed on skills identification, not with the use of standardized tests, but with much more informal um, techniques. And so sometimes, a person can be taken to a job site and asked to perform certain job tasks and to see if they could perform those job tasks. So that's different than the battery of tests that um, were used when it was developed, when assessment was first developed in the early 40s and mid 40s. And so, one thing about assessment is that um, there is the overall objective of making sure that whatever information we derive from assessments are accurate and help us to clearly identify the client's career um, needs or problems such that we're able to determine or to prefer interventions and develop goals that we could use to achieve those goals. Therefore, there is a need for counselors to be more knowledgeable about psychometric concepts that are necessary in selecting and using an assessment. One thing about assessment tools is that most assessment inventory may not be compatible in terms of use with certain population, and so we have to make sure that whatever assessments that we're selecting, we're using with the clients are those that would bring out the right results, or that the clients can easily complete for us to achieve or derive the results that we desire. And so counselors need to take a closer look at the psychometric properties. The psychometric properties are in terms of the instrument's validity and reliability. So reliability is one of the psychometric properties of assessment instruments, and reliability talks about the degree to which a test score is dependable and consistent. Um, if we use an assessment or a test, does that produce consistent results with repeated trials? Uh, are the results of or the outcomes of a test consistent? Are they stable over time, such that uh, if we use it uh, for one period and with one population, and then try it in another period with another population, we would have similar results or the same results. However, because assessments have to do also with the clients that we work with, we also have to think of reliability in terms of the factors that are situated within the person and how uh, that also could impact the outcomes of our assessments. And so some factors that could affect the stability of a test include like the moods of the person. Depending on what mood a person is in, that could impact the um, stability of the test. Another is group differences, um, such as gender and ethnicity. People are different in terms of their gender or ethnicity, and this affect their ability to understand certain concepts or to process uh, the components of an assessment. One thing that I would say is that there is a cultural component to tests and test taking because people's perception of the world or their approach to learning is determined by the cultural background from which they emerge and how they uh, organize and interpret information. Even within groups, within people from the same racial and ethnic groups, there might be individual differences that may impact um, the outcomes of a test. Another is the nature of performance. Um, Performance could um, depend on any given circumstances, contextual factors that are present when the test is being taken. The last thing is the internal consistency of the test itself, which talks about um, the uh, the items within the test and the way that the questions are structured and how the uh, concepts from each question or each item on the quiz is consistent across board. The second psychometric property that is important when we talk about assessment is validity, which talks about the meaningfulness or the usefulness of certain inferences based on the test uh, score derived from the test in question. So validity focuses on whether an assessment or a test assesses what it's supposed to assess. So there are two important aspects when it comes to validity for standardized instruments. The first one is content validity, and the other one is criterion validity. Content validity has to do with the components of a test, and this is often based on the opinion of experts in that particular area. Does the test reflect or capture knowledge that is um, typical for that knowledge area that we intend to cover? That can only be determined by subject experts. Uh, the second one is a criterion validity, which has to do with the degree to which the test scores predict uh, success for outcome criterion. So, for instance, if someone is assessed on, let's say, let's use a standardized test as an example, like the GRE. Does a person's score on the GRE reflect their ability to do well in graduate school? Um, so if a person scores, let's say, 800 or 900, does that mean that the person will be um, a A student when they go to college or when they go to graduate school? And so criterion validity focuses on uh, the ability of a test to predict future success in a particular area. Um, there are several challenges that are inherent in assessment. The US is very diverse, but one thing that has been a very thorny issue in the past has been that standardized tests are normed um, on a particular group, but are expected to be taken by people from several backgrounds. Um, and so when we use standardized tests, we should use them with caution because the content and the norms may not be applicable to all of the groups that may be taking the test in the future. So we're talking about group differences in terms of gender, age, race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, disability, language, or socioeconomic status. These differences tend to um, show up when people from groups other than those that in which the tests are normed um, are required to take a test. And so uh, career counselors has to have a conscious or deliberate approach to ensuring that group differences are addressed and that whatever tests that are used are those that provide better outcomes for all groups that are tested. And so there is a need to evaluate the tests and to make adaptations. And so, as a counselor, make sure that you know your test very well. Read the manual carefully to determine if the client is a member of the group that has been included in a normative sample used for validity and reliability analysis. If that's not the case, then you may have to find another test that may be suitable for that particular client. Also, make sure you obtain information about the client, such as their preferred language, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, gender, and other variables. Some goals that we need to um, consider when we are doing assessment. One is to identify the client's beliefs about assessment itself, identify their skill level and the proficiencies and their ability, identify their level of education or academic achievement, identify and confirm their interest level, discover their personality variables, determine what values they have when it comes to work, explore their career maturity variables, and also use computer assisted guidance counseling assessment. Some self-assessment procedures would include autobiographies, for instance, asking client to talk about their work history, um, or to talk about their background, and using that information to um, extrapolate on what their career interests are and their goals are. Also, make sure that when they are coming in for assessment, that you take as much background information as possible to uh, help develop a plan that would help the client to achieve better career outcomes. Focus on questions on uncovered to uncover specific variables. Look at their interests and then look at it as a lifelong exercise that needs to be